everyone. Hi, I welcome you in conversation with Goodera for our campaign for Autism Awareness Month. So, first tell me, how are you all? How are you guys?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for taking out your time to have this conversation with us today. It is our absolute honor and pleasure to have you and your nonprofit with us today. We know all about the awesome work that you have been doing with you and your nonprofit, but I would want you to take this platform to briefly introduce yourself and a little bit about you, your base, from where you are based out of, and the amazing work that you have been carrying out with your nonprofit. So please go ahead.
Okay, I can go first. I'm Jackie Benestante, and I'm the executive director. I've been here about 6.5 years, and I've done a lot of different things, advocacy work, marketing and media, program development, working with all, autism across the lifespan, supporting families and caregivers as well as autistic adults. We're a pretty small organization, so we all of us do quite a few different things. So I will, how about turn it over to Amy now and let her introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Amy Kellogg, and I am the workforce coordinator for Autism Society of Texas, and I help run our pre-employment training program, which helps individuals who are kind of in a transition age from teens into adult years, and we do have adults of all ages participate in our programs, but going into the workforce and how to build some of the skills that are needed, and some of the skills that would be beneficial, which, and it's about a 6-month program. And I also work closely with Jordan on that. And I also work closely with our team that develops our Autism Friendly Business Training Program, which is geared to help businesses and organizations better understand what it looks like to have neurodiversity in the workplace, which addresses a lot of some of what we're going to talk about today. My background is in special education and public education and in mental health case management.
And hello, I'm Jordan Fogel. I'm the projects coordinator. I primarily help facilitate our adult recreation and support and social skills groups, which are open to adults across the state. We host that through a meetup page. And I'm also based here in Austin. And as Amy said, I work closely with the workforce team. We host events, we host seminars, all aimed at preparing folks to enter the workforce.
Thank you so much. That was indeed a very beautiful introduction from each one of you. So now we shall start with today's discussion. So I want to ask you a very basic question. Like, most of us are pretty aware of this condition called autism, but there are still a section of the society who are still unaware, and they need to be educated about this condition. Could you please tell me briefly about autism? How does this occur? How does our bodily mechanism works? And how is this condition different from other chronic disorders?
That's a great question, and I'm going to tackle that one. And I will say I will do my best to answer this question. And if anybody else from AST wants to jump in, that's okay too. So autism is a complex and lifelong neurological developmental disability. It can affect each person so uniquely and individually different, which is why we refer to it as a spectrum. So you'll hear it referred to as autism spectrum disorder. It is a neurologically based disability, and oftentimes it's non-apparent. So like with some disabilities, you can see that, like if somebody's in a wheelchair, you can see that their mobility is impaired, or if somebody's walking with an assisted device to cross the street, you can see that maybe they're visually impaired. But a lot of times with some of these neurologically based disabilities, we call it non-apparent, right? And it's kind of like ADHD, but it falls under the scope of how the brain is wired differently. And it usually is defined by a certain set of behaviors that can impact one's ability to self-regulate, communicate, and socialize, which will vary and adjust across the lifespan. So if you see somebody that has some communication deficits in their early like childhood and some teen years, you may see that oftentimes improve as they get into adulthood. So we have a saying in the community, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? Because of how unique it is for everyone across the lifespan. There are some websites floating around that view autism as a chronic illness and something that kids outgrow, but that's not a narrative we subscribe to based on research and what we know of autism. There are also many efforts from the autism community to move away from pure language that we fully support here at AST. And so our efforts are really targeted at creating understanding and acceptance through education efforts, such as this one, because this is a great way to provide more information and understanding. Because a lot of the stuff floating around autism out there is, I'm sorry, let me turn my phone off, is, it's kind of based out of some myths and misconceptions about autism. So we're always happy to do these type of events. The focus is on acceptance and understanding and providing services and support. And it's important to note that level of support needs will vary from person to person, from early childhood into adulthood. So you may hear a term like low functioning or high functioning. We try and shy away from that term and talk about in terms of what are the support needs of the individual, because those support needs will vary from person to person. And so we really try to work with adults on effectively self-advocating. So for example, in the workplace, how do we advocate for ourselves, right? And ask for what we need to help us succeed. And we also have started working with businesses and organizations on recognizing how to create safe environments for individuals with any disability, whether it be a parent or not, to come and have the conversation about accommodations and get support, without feeling like they're going to be stigmatized or fall victim to someone else's unchecked bias towards autism and those related disabilities. And another way this has been demonstrated is in the call from much of the autism community, because what we're seeing is an increase in adults with autism coming out and saying, hey, here's what we need, here's what we like, here's what we don't like. And it's really been helpful. And we find it imperative in everything we do as far as how we communicate in these kind of situations as well. And an example of this would be a call from the autism community to stop using the puzzle piece as a way to represent them because of what it implies from a negative or deficit social standpoint. So the Autism Society of America has removed it from our branding and logos for that reason. And we never want anyone to feel like they're a puzzle that needs to be solved or something to be fixed or less than whole as a human being. And so much of the movement in the autism community now is surrounding empowerment and strength-based conversations regarding having autism, which again, is a neurological based. It's a neurological based disability, and more times than not, you're not going to know that somebody has it. And so, I would love for anybody else if they want to jump in and help answer that question as well. Or
yeah, I was just going to add that, like Amy said, in the way that it's like ADHD, it's because it's neurodevelopmental. But we want to just make sure everyone knows that, especially for those new to autism, like Amy mentioned, it's a spectrum disorder, but it means people can, have a very low level of support need, maintain a job, have very high IQ. There's a huge spectrum of abilities, sensory differences, cognitive abilities, and but it can, for some, it's also a very severe impairment. So we've really got a full range of spectrum of the autism spectrum. And that can be very, very challenging. There are autistic adults and children that require 24/7 care, always, permanently. And so we also want people to understand it's a spectrum disorder, because a lot of times just kind of one end of the spectrum is portrayed in the media and people tend to forget, and those are the folks that Amy was saying it's an invisible disability, then they don't even get always recognized. And then we've got the other end of the spectrum where families and some of the autistic adults and children are really struggling with the challenges and some of their deficits. So it's a huge, it's definitely, we just want people to understand it really as a spectrum disorder. So
thank you, Jackie. Yeah, absolutely. And it really, and like, we said, it can impact everybody so differently. And that's why we really encourage people not to make assumptions about it, because until you especially in what you see on TV, there's a lot of TV shows out there that portray people with autism and that, presented a certain way. And we can't make assumptions that that's how everybody with autism necessarily present. So that's a great point, Jackie. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, actually, yes, that is true, Jordan. I also agree with you. Jackie and Amy have very nicely and very easily they have made us understood, and it will be quite interesting and easy to understand for our listeners as well. So I hope by listening to this, they'll know a little bit more about autism and the autistic people, and how, irrespective of any genetic disorder or anything like that, we should love each one and respect each one as a human being. Thank you so much. And so next, my next question would be, how are you guys? How is your nonprofit working for this cause? Like, I want to know if I am a volunteer for your nonprofit, how will be my one day would go?
Yeah, and I can go ahead and answer that question. So we provide, our organization provides advocacy, which is really in the form of legislative advocacy. So we're based in Texas. So we work at the state level, working on legislation and bills and implementation of the legislation. And same at the federal level, but Autism Society of America has public policy staff there, but I'm involved in their committee. But people can always get involved in that. And then we have education events. And so we can have professionals sometimes volunteer to come in and educate either parents and caregivers or the autistic adults themselves. We have a couple of education programs. One is called Seminars Across the Spectrum. And that one is geared more towards parents and caregivers, so for those with younger kids, they can actually learn the skills and then teach their children those things. So whether it's, safety in a first responder situation, or we just did sex ed guidance, just topics that parents may not know. And we want to make sure we're, keeping, autistic adults informed as well. And to that end, Amy and Jordan coordinate a program called Autonomy. And those topics are a little more geared to older autistic adults so that they can learn the information themselves. And we welcome parents and caregivers of older teens and autistic adults as well. But those topics are a little bit more geared towards autistic adults, where they could themselves learn the information and implement it. So we have those education events, and we have opportunities to volunteer there for professionals who are, are familiar with those topics or specialists in that area. And then as far as volunteers, we have a lot of, first of all, we have a huge group that volunteers during the legislative advocacy session. So people can call in and get involved, and we have trainings for, parents or autistic adults to become advocates themselves and contact their elected officials. So that's a volunteer opportunity. We have a number of support and recreation groups. And for some of them, like Jordan runs many of them for the autistic adults. But we also have, we have a group that's led by an autistic adult. For other autistic adults, we've got multiple parent caregiver groups. We have some recreation groups, and all of those, our organization was largely built on volunteers. For 20 years, we didn't have staff. It was just all volunteers, and it started as parents helping parents. But over the years, we've added staff. Everybody realized that, autistic adults, children become autistic adults and they need services and support. And so it's a lifespan disability. And so, we're always looking for volunteers if they would like to host a group, we have training, we have a team here that can help launch new groups around the state. And then I think that's probably it. And then, we also, on our board, we have committees where if people have like specific things like marketing or finance or things like that, so people could get involved even more directly by serving on a board committee. So, and I almost forgot to mention, we have a couple of big events. We have it's called the Texas Autism Walk, and it's happening April 24th, just outside Austin. But that is a very heavy volunteer event where we need people to come and hand out water and snacks to volunteers and cheer and, help out. And then we also do the Austin Marathon. We have a team that runs for us in the Austin Marathon, and we volunteer there in return they give charities funding if you'll volunteer at the event. So that's another volunteer opportunity. So that's kind of some of the work that we do for the cause and how people could get involved.
Whatever I just heard was very inspiring. So, like, the understanding that I have gotten is that it's not just a small community, but then more it spreads, more it benefits our beneficiaries. You know, like through the volunteer activities, we are spreading awareness, and then also the families that are involved, the closer families that are involved, like the parents and everything. So more aware are they, more benefit that will give to our beneficiaries, the autistic crowd that we have, be it of any age group. So when this thing came to my mind, I was very curious to know what role can a parent play what role does a parent have in this picture?
The parents usually play a pretty big role. I mean, especially in the diagnosis. A lot of times it's parents that are noticing kind of signs of autism in the first place. Sometimes not, though. Sometimes it's not a parent, or if it's you only have one child, it's your first child, you may not realize that they're developing differently. But certainly when people have siblings and the other siblings are non-autistic, parents usually can tell pretty early on. So a lot of times it is the parents and caregivers that are seeing the signs of autism and getting that, kind of seeking out that diagnosis. But also, in the last few years, the diagnostic criteria changed, like in the early 90s. And so there's actually quite a lot of adults that did not receive an autism diagnosis that are they're autistic. And so they maybe got an ADHD diagnosis in school, or they usually had some sort of diagnosis like anxiety or depression or ADHD or something else, or social anxiety disorder. But they, as adults or as teens, mostly as adults, we get calls that people start realizing later in life that they are actually autistic. And that it was, they got a misdiagnosis when they were younger because it was often missed, and especially in women and girls. So a lot of times in adults now, we're seeing them realize themselves that they're meeting the diagnosis of autism and contacting us to find out where to get a diagnosis. But usually in kids, it's the parents and caregivers that are usually the first ones to notice. Sometimes it can be teachers or a preschool if the child is really sticking out or really having a challenging time in school. Sometimes it does end up being like preschool teachers. Teachers are the ones that notice, but many times it is the parents.
So why do you feel that it's sometimes the diagnosis is missed, and especially for girls? Is it because of the medical facilities, or is it because of the stigma that's surrounding it? Like, what can be the reason?
But there's a few different things going on. I mean, the diagnostic criteria, they used to just think it was only boys, and the whole entire diagnostic criteria was very male-centered. And it still is. And then, so they're like girls like fly under the radar. They don't present quite as well. They often, unless they have pretty severe impairment and speech impairment or IQ, a lot of women and girls are able to mask better. So they're kind of faking it and trying to act like they're, what they see and what they think is correct, which we call masking. But that sometimes can hide their real diagnosis, or they get misdiagnosed. A lot of professionals here, even, here in the US, we see professionals missing autism in girls and women all the time. It's not that they're not out there. They're being diagnosed. I think there was like a study where like a boy and a girl go in with the same exact symptoms, issues, challenges, and behaviors, and a girl will come out with like ADHD or bipolar or something else, and the boy comes out with an autism diagnosis, and we still see that a lot. We see a lot of girls rack up many diagnoses before they're actually diagnosed with autism, like into their teens or adulthood, and it really can cause a lot of challenges, like with mental health and other, just a lot of problems, because you're not really getting the right help when you don't know the real diagnosis. And so there's a lot of factors there. And it's also counted, another thing that affects the number of girls versus boys is the CDC actually counts the diagnosis prevalence rate at age 8. And because a lot of girls are missed, a lot of girls are getting diagnosis later than age 8. So we actually try to advocate to move the age, but it hasn't been yet. And so it doesn't really capture the full number. The CDC prevalence rate isn't really capturing the full number of girls either. So
So you just mentioned something about the age thing. Can you explain more on that? And that was the first question. And the second question is there a way we can prevent it? Like, or if it's found out later in life, so like you said, it gets very severe. So are there any steps that can be taken to reduce it, even if it's diagnosed later in the lifetime?
So you were asking me about the age first?
Yeah,
was that the first question?
Yes.
And that was the age that I mentioned, age 8 years old.
Oh, so you said, okay, got it.
Oh, well, the only reason I mentioned that is because the Centers for Disease Control counts like every I think it's a couple of years, they do like a prevalence rate, and they announce like how many children are diagnosed with autism. And right now, the most recent prevalence rate was 1 in 44. So 1 in every 44 children are diagnosed with autism. But when they're looking at the medical records to figure that out, they're looking at how many kids are diagnosed by age 8. So you have to be diagnosed by age 8, and most girls are not. So that's another reason the numbers are lower for girls. So that's what I was kind of talking about with the age cutoff there. It doesn't mean girls are not autistic at all ages. It just means that's when they're counting it. And then the other question was like, you're not going to really be able to do anything to prevent it. And, you know, this is a neurological disorder. People are born with autism, so it's not a preventable thing. All you can do is like, you know, teach skills, help support them, have improved communication skills. So we always, like Amy was saying, we try to like work on skill building. Our focus at Autism Society is just to help the person, whether it's an adult or a child or a family helping a child. But we always want to focus on like, how can we improve the skills of the individual with autism? And there's still, even if they don't have that diagnosis and they have an ADHD diagnosis, you know, sometimes they might have an ADHD diagnosis and a speech impairment diagnosis. And so they may still be getting therapy as a child for either behavioral or speech impairment and going to speech therapy. So you would just want to work on the skill building over their lifetime so that like as they're adults, they've kind of maximized their potential. So I think we would look at it more like that than there's really no preventing it. So
yeah, that's correct. It's something that we don't have any control on. But the diagnosis part that happens early, when parents come in and they have a doubt that they want to get their child diagnosed, so are there chances that they'll get, be it a boy or a girl, are there chances that they'll get properly diagnosed, or what are the failure chances there?
Oh, what are the chances of getting properly diagnosed? I honestly don't have the statistics on that. I don't know, but I would say that it definitely depends on like your region and where you live, and you know, a lot of different factors. How well your diagnosing professional is familiar with diagnosis, because we also see in the United States, there's a lot of like people of color, African Americans are often labeled with more like disciplinary actions. Like when they have a disability, they're instead disciplined, you know, so it's overlooked. There's definitely like racial disparity in diagnosis, there's regional disparity. So I don't have all the stats on like how many people try to get a diagnosis and then don't get it, but we certainly get that a lot. You know, we hear it a lot here. We have a program where families or autistic adults can call us and we will help them and help find them resources. And that's a frequent question. You know, parents are pretty convinced their child has autism and the school told them they didn't, or a professional may have told them they didn't, you know, so we definitely see it a lot, but I don't think there's like statistics exist on that.
Yes. So, what do you think? What role a stigma plays in, like, what role a stigma has in all of this picture? What kind of stigma exists in the society, and till like how far have we been able to curb all of it, and what all still exists that, you know, really hinders the process of the goal that we have to reach?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I'll just address a few areas briefly. You know, one area, you know, autistic folks may engage in what's called stimming, and this may look like hand flapping or rocking back and forth. It's important to recognize that this is a self-regulatory behavior, and researchers have linked it to helping folks integrate and process sensory information. You also might notice a child or adult vocalizing or repeating what they've heard others say, or reciting a script. And these are self-initiated behaviors, and they're not sort of involuntary, like a spasm or a tremor or something like that. And though therapists may work with individuals who engage in sort of self-injurious behavior or dangerous behaviors, stimming is generally understood as something to be embraced and accommodated for, sort of rather than stifled or suppressed. It's also important to note that sensory processing challenges, which include sensitivities to light, sound, and touch, are regarded as one of the diagnostic criteria for autism. But in the general population, rates of sensory processing disorder are estimated to be between 5 and 16%, which is significant. Some people with autism may be nonverbal. Some may use an iPad to communicate. Some may be verbal but still have difficulty with speech. So when interacting with someone with autism, always presume competence. It's a common misconception to think that just because someone can answer with their body, they must not know the answer in their mind. But that's a dangerous assumption, just because it can cut off opportunities and access for folks with autism. And in the workplace, adults on the spectrum may struggle to conform to, certain social expectations around making small talk, interpreting sort of ambiguous instructions, and tolerating noisy, chaotic environments. And therefore, it's important that team leaders take kind of an inclusive, strengths-based approach to, allocating tasks, deliver information in a way that aligns with the preferences and the needs of their team members, allow ample time for question asking, and answer clarification, and make quiet spaces available throughout the day, for folks to take a break, reset, process new information. And this is a practice that, is beneficial for all employees. Additionally, it's sometimes difficult, even painful for autistic people to maintain eye contact, which, folks are often stigmatized around. Interviewees with autism may not make eye contact with hiring managers, during an interview process, and, this may preclude them from gaining employment. So regardless of whether an interviewee is disclosed a diagnosis or not, lack of eye contact is definitely not something to be read into. Just remember that lack of eye contact doesn't mean people aren't listening. Many people focus or hear better when not making eye contact. And, and also, in order for interviews to more effectively sort of assess prospective attendees' skills or employees' skills, we encourage our business partners at the Autism Society of Texas to provide interview questions ahead of time, as well as to structure interviews in kind of a more, structure them around skill demonstration, rather than just kind of, reporting what it is, and kind of talking about the knowledge that you have. And just a few other little things, just kind of general myths and misconceptions about autism. Though many folks have what seem like restricted, sort of repetitive interests, not all folks with autism fit that sort of savant stereotype. The classic example being the movie Rain Man. I don't know if y'all have seen that. Folks with autism don't lack empathy. That's another thing that self-advocates report kind of brushing up against. This couldn't be further from the truth. Folks just may express their empathy in a way that's sort of not commonly recognized, right? And lastly, folks with autism don't lack humor. In fact, many of the folks we serve with here at the Autism Society are like stand-up comedian level hilarious. And folks with autism are not rude. Many self-advocates describe themselves as being blunt, and though that may initially be off-putting for some people, clear and direct honesty really in any workplace or really in any situation, that ought to be regarded as an asset. So that's something that we hear as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jordan. I just want to add one thing onto that is important, just to kind of going back to that stimming conversation. A lot of times when we have conversations around autism, we're thinking in terms of young kids. A lot of times, a lot of the treatment conversations, a lot of the portrayal conversations do happen in the context of younger age groups. And it's important though, because the younger age groups is when a lot of parents and caregivers can and school systems can utilize those early childhood intervention programs that are so vital, right? And so key in those early ages. But when we talk about across the lifespan and individuals getting older, again, some of these things may change for somebody because we're all human, we're all dynamic, right? And so kind of what Jordan's talking about with the stimming and the sensory stuff, you know, as an adult, you may see it as somebody needing to get up and walk around and pace. Or if they've gotten some new information, sometimes those transitions from, hey, I'm doing this one thing, and now I have to transition into doing another thing, right? Those can be challenges that a lot of times fly under the radar until you see it in action. And you're like, why did that person just get frustrated by being asked to do this? It really wasn't that big of a deal. Well, for them it is, because kind of transitioning from doing that one thing into another, right, is a little bit tougher. And that's not all the time, but in some cases it is for someone with autism. And so just having that understanding so we can extend that grace when needed and kind of learn to work with that person and get to know them a little bit more before making assumptions about them is always a great idea. And so, you know, I've met autistic adults who are like, their way of processing information is getting up and walking around without saying anything, you know, or having that motion or movement is really helpful, or having something to play with, or, again, not across the board, all the same, but those are some examples of ways that it may present.
Oh my God, that listening to all of that, it's it's like, especially listening to what Jordan said, what the autistic adults face in the workspace and also in the personal life. I believe that is screaming for attention and for cooperation from the society, which sometimes they might not be getting. So what do you think, where have we come by far in making people aware about the situations and the way they deal with the autistic, especially able people?
So, sorry, Amrisha. So sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah. So how long have we come where the surroundings, the society is more aware? Like what's the awareness level now compared to like 10 years ago or 15 years ago? Like, is there a progress, and what is the rate of the progress?
Good question. Do you guys want me to answer that, or does anybody else want to jump in? I'll kind of tackle it. Yeah. Okay. So I think I would say definitely awareness has hugely increased, but there's also been a huge increase in the prevalence rate of people with autism. And so as that's increased, you know, the awareness level has increased. There's been a lot more autism organizations. There's lots more people out there, you know, whether it's autistic adults, as we talked about, getting a late diagnosis, or, you know, families. So I think awareness is very broad in a lot of countries. I mean, in some countries it's not, you know, and there's still some regions of the United States where awareness is like we still hear things here in Texas where they're like, oh, well, he could talk, so he doesn't have autism, you know, and then, you know, like, we haven't done enough awareness, you know, like, these people, not everybody is aware, you know, as aware as we would like them to be. But our organization, you know, we're the state affiliate of the Autism Society of America. And we've actually changed our, last year, we officially, instead of calling April Autism Awareness Month, we've actually moved to Autism Acceptance Month, because overall in the United States, we do feel like there's a lot of awareness. I mean, really everyone's heard of autism and knows something about autism, whether it's incorrect or not, they've at least heard of autism. You know, there is some level of awareness out there for the majority of the people. And so what we really see is now we need acceptance in the community. And I think 10 years ago, the awareness wasn't there, or 15 years ago, the awareness wasn't there. And I think there's really pretty broad awareness at this point. You know, social media and television and everything else, I think there's a good level of awareness. But what Autism Society is trying to focus on now is acceptance. And that's like things like Amy and Jordan's, like their job program, and making sure that the autistic adults can know how to work in these environments that are designed for neurotypicals, but also making sure that workplaces are supporting them and making the accommodations. And it's not hard to include individuals with autism. It's really not, you know, so it's like just knowing what to do. You know, Amy and Jordan have a program called Autism Friendly Business, but just knowing how to be autism friendly and how to be welcoming, or what accommodations or modifications can you make. So now we're kind of working on acceptance in the community across a lot of different everything, and it's all across society, because I mean, autism is a lifespan. It's a lifespan disability, and so it's always, support across the lifespan, and acceptance and community inclusion are needed really in every area that any person would be in, so there's a lot of work to do there. I feel like the awareness part's pretty good. The acceptance part has a long way to go. That's my feeling.
Yeah, and there's a lot of responsibility in the hands of educators as well, working with students with any disability, in the classroom and in inclusive settings, and just to kind of help, because really that's where a lot of those fundamental things happen, is from elementary to middle to high school. And, because in school we're learning to learn, right? And what we learn about ourselves in school is really important. And we're hearing more and more from the adult, as people get on the adult side of things, hearing some of those stories of, wow, this has really impacted me when I was in high school or middle school, and really impacted the way I felt about myself. So, so one of the things we're seeing improve, and that we're trying to help improve, is instead of having the conversation of, hey, how can we help this kid be less autistic, or not do that, or try and fit in better, right? It's how can we help this kid or this person feel empowered in who they are, and understand their diagnosis, and understand their support needs, and be able to advocate for themselves, and find places of strength and empowerment around that, right? Because that's a whole different conversation to have with a middle schooler and high schooler than trying to make somebody feel like they fit in better, right? And we carry that conversation into adulthood as well. And so that's another way we kind of see some of that improvement happening as we're moving along, and we're trying to push that uphill ourselves with a lot of the conversations, and like these opportunities provide that too. So yeah.
That gives me a lot of relief that we have come a long way, but then yes, we should not forget that where we have to reach. Talking about stories and listening that how much of a role a teacher can play in a student's life, especially an autistic student's life, do you have any stories that really inspires, that really sends out a message to the mass that, look, this can be our target that we have to achieve? Any inspiring story around autism or a child that must have faced?
That's a hard one. I mean, we hear a lot of stories. I mean, there's a lot of parents are told their kids can't do things, or they don't know how they're going to, a lot of, I mean, it's getting a little bit better, but not that much. But doctors are pretty negative when they give the diagnosis still. And I think, everybody, I think parents really celebrate small milestones and developments. And, we always say it's a developmental delay. It's not never, like they're hopefully going to get there, and they're going to, it may be slower than their typical peers, and that's okay, So, I mean, I don't know if I can give a specific story, but I mean, we see autistic children and adults doing great things all the time, going to college, driving, learning to drive, doing, and the milestones are different for everyone, and the accomplishments are different. For some, it's like, my kid said 2 words and he's 5 or 6 years old. That's a huge accomplishment if that child has not spoken until age 6, and so, I don't know if I have specific stories, but, we're always amazed at what people with autistic people can do. And a lot of times, especially when they're younger, you can't really see how they're going to develop until, you do the therapy and you see the parents put in the work, and then they really bloom into themselves and have their own set of, strengths and challenges. But, you gotta, like we had said, you gotta just keep working on those kind of lifelong skill building, Yeah, I don't know, Amy or Jordan, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'm just thinking, I know who Jordan's probably thinking of, but I was just thinking off the top of my head, I used to teach high school, and I've seen students who, when they were in middle school, if you would read some of what the teachers wrote about, well, they're having difficulty with this and this and this and this. And then to see them on the other side of high school now, what they're doing internships with, marketing companies and website creators and going to, university where they want to go, just having, if they would have continued in this mindset of, oh, well, this is a deficit for me, I'm not going to be able to overcome this. Again, it's a lot of what they're, how they're encouraged and the inclusion that takes place right early on. But, I've seen stuff like that happen over and over, which is really, it's really neat to see somebody blossom into themselves across the board, but especially when you kind of get to see that unfold. And I'm sure, Jordan, do you want to share about our friend who was told music wasn't going to be a thing for him, and then now look at him?
Yeah. So working with his Texas Workforce Coordinator, which is kind of like the Department for Vocational Rehabilitation here in Texas. He was paired with this, this counselor that encouraged him not to pursue music, which was his passion, that he ought to go into computers, something where, it's sort of low stress, sort of a repetitive task, something that he could earn a stable living at. And, it was very discouraging for him, because music was his sort of heart and soul. And for a few years there, he kind of went into this downward spiral, struggled with mental health. But somewhere along the way, he decided to pursue music, and, he's sort of, he's come in and out of our program a few times. And I think he's made contact with a good team of folks who support him and encourage him to kind of follow his dream. And now he's thriving. He's a musician. He appears in, all over town here in Austin, Texas, performing. And he just released an album. He appeared, I think, in a major motion picture, something like that. So he's doing great, so that's a story that we always invite him to our events, and he tells wonderful stories and gives a lot of insight and inspires others, to kind of follow their passions. And also, I wanted to outline, it's not a success story per se, but it's kind of an effective model. We have what we call a reverse job fair, where we encourage employers to accept, videos made by prospective attendees before they ever make contact with them. Videos that outline who they are, what they're interested in. And this has been a wonderful way to kind of rethink the hiring process and to connect folks to employment opportunities that they might not otherwise would have landed. And that's been a way, overnight, we've seen like folks who were participating in our programs may be unsure about what they wanted to do, very quickly and effectively find employment kind of through this channel. So, we just encourage our business partners to kind of rethink that process, because it's a way to diversify your talent pool, find incredibly hardworking, talented people who are ready to work and who would love to, serve your company. So, that's kind of a success that we see.
Lovely words. The story that you have shared, it's actually so empowering to hear. And I just wish him all the best for the future. And I hope many such come up in the future itself. So we have come towards the end of today's discussion. But before ending, I want to ask one last question to everyone, to each one of you. I want you guys to give a message for all those potential volunteers who are willing to give their time and efforts for this cause, telling them that their bare minimum contribution can bring a life-changing impact. So let's start with Amy.
Sure. Yeah, I would just say that the first and most important thing is always seek to understand, right? In any situation before making an assumption. And and probably with equal with that is to always assume confidence, right? When you're engaging with somebody, when you're talking with somebody, give that person the benefit of the doubt of presuming competence, assume the ability to process, learn, and understand with the right supports, right? So someone may not process, learn, and understand the way I do, but I need to assume that the person I'm talking with has that ability, but maybe they need certain supports in place to help them exceed at that or find that strength even more. And recognize that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? Just kind of keeping that in mind. Everyone is so uniquely different in their own journey and their own stories, right? Everyone's stories are so uniquely different. And then also developing a better understanding of how to best serve individuals with autism and other disabilities and challenge assumptions that might come up regarding someone's behavior, communication styles, or work habits, I would think in the workplace. And then also just looking for strengths and looking to build off those in interactions.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll go out on a limb, but one of the things that's most beautiful about life is the, incredible variation, between and among people when it comes to learning and loving and and working, you know. It keeps life interesting. And yeah, I think any opportunity you have to kind of reach out and get a sense of someone's kind of inherent awesomeness, you know, and worth. You know, I think it's a true blessing, you know. So particularly in this context, you know, when meeting someone for the first time, you don't know exactly what's going on in their life, or, you know, some of the social anxieties that they wrestle with, particularly in this time, you know, post-pandemic, or, you know, in a world that's really pretty stressful. So I think this is it's really important work, and I think now more than ever, it's worth taking the time to listen to other people and maybe learning something along the way, you know, about yourself and about what it means to be a person.
Yeah, Amy and Jordan said it all. So you know, I would just say we, you know, as we talked about acceptance, and you know, we really want to promote that in the community. And, you know, for our volunteers, we're just grateful, you know, to have volunteers. This organization and Autism Society of America was founded on volunteers for years. And, you know, we definitely rely on them to continue our work. You know, we rely all on donations. We're a really small staff. And in order to support the number of people we do, it's critical to have volunteers helping in any capacity, whether they're just helping as mail thank you letters or doing something that seems like not important. It's important because it still helps us. If you're doing a task for us or helping us in some way, then we're more able to directly, it frees us up to like teach the employment program or do something else with our time to create a new program or work with somebody directly, or, you know. And so volunteers are critical, and you know, and everyone can make a difference, you know, just by listening to this. I hope people will learn a lot, and just kind of, you know, drop some of their, you know, preconceptions about autism and what people with, you know, with autism can do. So I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Jordan, for sharing these wonderful messages. I hope, you know, you reach one day your mission, your goals through your nonprofit and through your actions, and helping, and many people come to your help as well. I hope people listen to this and come up for help. And with this, we have come to an end of this discussion. So as I was saying, we have a small surprise for you. So, and that surprise is, you have to come up with one gesture which represents you, or which represents your nonprofit or your mission or goal.
Yeah, thank you. And do you all need, like, we have a lot of branding guidelines, like our logo and brand mark, and then we have some rules about how our logo is used. Will you be using any of that on the video?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for your wonderful input.
Yes, it was so nice to meet all of you.